All right. Welcome back, everybody, to the brain injury discussion. This is your host, Jay. Today, we're going to talk more anatomy. We're going to talk about the sensory and the motor cortex. Both are very important to your daily function and also kind of near each other in the brain. They're actually bordered. And we also should talk about what they do in the body and also what might happen if they get injured. Like always, sources will be in the description below. We'd encourage you to read those. We'd appreciate if you liked this video. We do appreciate when we get thumbs ups and also comment. Comment down below if you have a suggestion for a topic, or maybe you have a question, or maybe you have a remark. We'd love to hear it. Also, feel free to subscribe to the channel. Again, those are free and they really help us out. We try to put out this information weekly, keep it informative, but yet applicable. But with that being said, we have some information to get into, so let's get started. First, let's talk about these terms up here. We have what's called the precentral gyrus, the postcentral gyrus, and the central sulcus. The gyruses are the hills of the brain, and the sulci, or the sulcuses, they are the valleys of the brain. And so we see right here is the motor cortex and the sensory cortex. Those are the uh, hills, you might say, and in between them is this valley, and it is called the central sulcus. Multiple sulcus is sulci, and multiple gyrus is gyri. And so that's good medical terminology there. And so this is how you can identify certain parts of the brain. And so we also see with the central sulcus the division between the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe. And so that's differentiates the different parts of the brain. The brain is a wide encompassing word for a very important organ. And so knowing this terminology might help us make better decisions as case managers, as clients, as clinical or non-clinical professionals. So the further definition is the lateral surface on the frontal lobe for the precentral, and of course for the postcentral, it is the lateral surface on the parietal lobe. And so it serves several motor pathways, and same with the parietal lobe, it's several sensory pathways. And so it connects all together. This is where you find the motor and sensory cortex, where they are located and where they are divided. This is the dividing line between the frontal and the parietal lobe. And so, frontal lobe being motor, where you do the executive functioning of sending signals, and then parietal, which is the sensory part of the brain, that's where you receive the information. And this is also the area that receives and sends, again, motor, movement, and sensory information. Motor, think about a motor on a vehicle, motor on a car. Without that motor, the car isn't going to move. So motor translates really to movement, and sensory is senses. Think about sight, think about smell, think about taste, think about touch, and also think about your hearing as well. Those are part of the senses as well. And so those are important locations for providers to know, especially neurologists. But you might ask, well, aren't we talking about the motor and sensory cortex? Well, yes, let's start with motor. We'll get to sensory here in a minute. The motor cortex is defined as the primary function of the motor cortex to send signals to direct body's movement. Again, this is part of the frontal lobe with the executive functioning. And so this sends the signals to move your leg, move your arm, look this way, touch this, don't touch that. And so the motor cortex is what's sending the information from the brain to the part of the body. And so it is part of the frontal lobe, again, part of the, executive functioning area, the front part of the brain, um, and is anterior to the central sulcus. And what do you mean by anterior? Anterior means front or in front of. And so you have anterior and posterior. Anterior is in front, posterior being behind. And so, again, that central sulcus which is the divided point between the frontal and the parietal lobe. It is anterior to it, or to the front, or anatomical front of that sulcus. The purpose really is to send of this part of the body is to send motor signals from the brain to the rest of the body. Again, this is kind of that command center sending commands to the other parts of the body. This is how the central nervous system not only sends command, but this is how the central nervous system is connected to the peripheral nervous system. As we can see, the fingers, the hands, the tongue, the feet, those are peripheral nervous systems connections that connects to the motor cortex. So in this case, which you see me on screen, I'm using my motor cortex to speak, to move my mouth, move my tongue, and also I'm moving my hands. And so the motor cortex is active at work. But Jay, we're talking about a two-way street, right? So let's talk a little bit about the complementary function, which is the sensory cortex. It is the nervous system that maintains sensation within the various dermatomes of sensation throughout the body. What is a dermatome? That word, if I were to pull up the dermatome map, it would literally connect different parts of the skin to the spine to the brain. And so that is what a dermatome is. However, we're talking about the sensory cortex, which takes that information, interprets it for the brain. And so we see that this area is full of receptors. So it's receiving information. And this area is actually mapped, but we can also see that it's not just taking raw information, it's taking information from certain sources and from different areas of the body. And so, information, if I were to walk on something, my foot and toes would be getting this information to my brain. Maybe if I stepped on something, that's maybe not fun to step on. Maybe I'm wearing a pair of very uncomfortable shoes. That part of the brain is what's receiving that information. Versus if I'm touching something with my hand or with my fingers, this part of the brain is what's being used. And so, kind of when we talk about brain mapping, about the different functions of the brain, this is where the information is processed and where it's gathered. It's like, yes, I'm touching this pen as an example. My fingers, I'm using my sensory cortex to touch and interpret the pen so I can use it. And so I'm using my sensory cortex in that way. And this is what connects the peripheral nervous system to the central nervous system. We're talking about those complementary functions of central and peripheral nervous systems working together. And this is how that periphery is sending information to the brain, which the brain is interpreting so that way motor movement can be precise and accurate. So you might be asking, well, Jay, what does this lead me as the case manager or the brain injury case manager to conclude? Well, first, anatomy is extremely important. Anatomy, the word anatomy is the parts of the body. It's important to clinical professionals who work with brain injury. It's also important to non-clinical professionals to have at least a basic knowledge of brain anatomy. I'm not saying you need to be able to fully identify what goes where in the motor and sensory cortexes or be able to pick out what sulci or what gyri is what and what does it do. But it is good for brain injury case managers like myself to have a good knowledge base of anatomy. Also, these areas are mapped. The brain isn't just one singular organ, it has many parts to it. And these many parts have very specific purposes. Kind of like a car isn't just a big fuel tank. A car has a motor, a transmission, tires, wheels, differentials, radiator. A car has different parts with different purposes, and the brain along those same lines, except way more complex. And so we think about the brain as being one organ, well, it's one organ with many different parts that make it the organ that it is. And kind of my final point with all of this, Knowledge about anatomy is wisdom about physiology. You might be asking, Jay, what does that mean? Well, anatomy is the parts of the body. The study of anatomy is the study of the body or the human body. And so when we know anatomy, it gives us wisdom, which is taking that knowledge and using it for good. For example, we want better outcomes for our clients. We want better outcomes for people that we work with. And we're able to use that knowledge for physiology, which is the complementary part of anatomy. You usually see those two taught together. Anatomy is the parts of the body, and physiology is how those parts of the body work and interact with things. And so it's good to know about these complementary systems like the motor and sensory cortex. They complement each other. You need both. They do very different jobs. So that's why they are complementary. And the same thing goes with anatomy, studying the body, studying the different parts of the body and physiology. How does it interact? How does this work? And so you really need both. So knowledge about anatomy is wisdom about physiology. But with that being said, I think I'm going to wrap it up here. Here are my references. They should be very interesting for neurologists, but I would encourage you to read this on your own as well. There's a lot of good information here, even though it's only three sources. But we would like your feedback in the form of maybe subscribing to the channel. It doesn't cost you anything to subscribe. Maybe share this with a friend. Share this with a neurologist you know, or maybe share this with someone who has a brain injury or works with people with brain injury. We'd appreciate that. We try to keep this information applicable, but we also try to keep it informative as well and educational. And so we're trying to hit all good basis points here. Also, we'd appreciate if you leave us a like and maybe drop a comment down below if there's a topic you want us to cover in a future video. But with that being said, I hope everyone has a wonderful day and don't forget, protect your brains.